I have a quick answer to Connie's questions. Yep, with webinar, we're able to make the screen fixed on the panelists. And then to have yourself unmuted to ask a question, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And right now I see Carmen still has her hand up. So either I'll be unmuting her or she'll be putting her hand down and we'll do an introductions. Looks like she put it down. So, all right. So I'm going to kick it off by thanking everyone for being here today. Looks like Corey still has the video paused. Maybe that's what I need to do. Right. There we go. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Amber Newman. I am a program officer in the Community Impact Homelessness Program at Northwest Minnesota Foundation. And this landlord engagement is the kickoff event for a series. We're going to try to do them quarterly because we've realized, and we've always known really, that with homelessness, we really need landlords as partners in the process, and we need to be talking with you and hearing from you. And we really hope that this is a great opportunity for you to engage with us and hear from some experts in their field, as well as many of the participants, and the questions will come today from housing specialists and other policymakers and landlords. The attendees are pretty equally mixed. It's kind of exciting that way. So yeah, thank you very much for being here. And Corey is going to host today. He's going to help me with the chat options and keep things running smoothly. Corey?
Hi everyone. I've got to meet a lot of you on the call, but not everyone. So it's exciting that Amber was able to work to get this all planned and work with all of our great panelists today. And so I'm super excited about this. What I'm going to be doing is monitoring for questions. So I think Amber's got an agenda for some of the panelists to kick things off with some topics around evictions and things on COVID-19 and different things. And we'll have plenty of time for questions. And the way that we can ask questions are, I can't see exactly where it is, but people have been figuring it out. There's a way to raise your hand, and that'll allow me to unmute you to ask your question. Otherwise, there's a box at the bottom called Q&A. And anytime you want to ask a question, you put it in that Q&A box, and I'll try to find the best way to get your question into the mix with our panelists and get our panelists to respond to those questions. So a little different than a typical Zoom meeting. We're just gonna, monitor that to really make it so our panelists have the time to shine and give as much information as you guys can get today. So yeah, does that work, Amber?
That's great, thanks. So now if Bob will go, if you'll introduce yourself.
I will. Yeah, my name is Robert Enger. I'm an attorney with Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota. I am currently officed in the Bemidji area. Our office serves primarily the 5 counties in Beltrami County, Hubbard County, Monoman County, Clearwater County, and Lake of the Woods is our primary responsibility. But during this peacetime emergency, we've actually been taking turns taking phone calls from everyone in our 22 counties. I've been an attorney with Legal Services here in Bemidji for more than 25 years now.
Thanks, Robert. Kathy?
Hi. I'm Kathy Guess, and I am Vice President of the Headwaters Landlord Association. And the Headwaters Landlord Association has 2 purposes. Number 1, we are an organized voice for the greater Bemidji area landlords. So we interact with the local government entities such as the City of Bemidji, the greater Bemidji Joint Planning Board, local townships, representing landlords' interests in housing issues. And second of all, we provide support and education for our members to make them better, stronger landlords. And I myself am a landlord and have been one since my early 20s. And so I welcome all my fellow landlords out there, as well as all the people that are involved in the greater Bemidji housing issues.
Thank you, Kathy. Kirk?
My name is Kirk Karstens. I'm a social worker managing housing programs as a housing specialist with Bi-County Community Action Program. I've been doing this for well over a dozen years now, all in the Bemidji area. And I too am a landlord. I'm a property manager. I work with both sides of the equation all the time.
Thank you, Kirk. Mike Frau?
Sure, thanks. Attorney Mike Frau from Homeline. I am the managing attorney there, and I run our tenant hotline where we advise about 15,000 renters all around the state on their rights and responsibilities. I have given landlord speeches all over the state. I've been to Bemidji several times in person, and am happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, if we could just quickly go around the group again and kind of talk a little bit about how COVID-19 and the moratorium and the COVID-19 housing assistance programs have affected you or not affected you, or just a brief outline on kind of what you've been seeing lately with COVID-19. Robert?
I would say with respect to the peacetime emergency, it has affected our potential clients with respect to the protections provided under the executive orders. We do see, I mean, we're not seeing as many even landlord-tenant questions right now because of those protections. I do think that we have fairly well-educated landlords in the community who do understand what you can and can't do under the executive order. Of course, we still have to go to court, and we still have to, fight the fight sometimes, but for the most part, we haven't seen the flux of housing issues or housing related eviction issues that we have generally seen over the summer or over the fall. But we are anticipating, I know that Mike is going to say it too, we are waiting for that shoe to drop once the executive order and the peacetime emergency goes away.
Kathy? Anything from the Landlord Association side?
Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation, we have not met in person, and we usually do 3 times a year to take the pulse of what's going on in the community. So we had our first Zoom meeting just this week, and it has been, I think, from what I know, it has impacted us less than what we thought financially. The Bemidji area is still doing very well as far as the collections are concerned. And speaking to my local banker and also other landlords, it appears that because of the support we've had with unemployment insurance, the bonuses, and our unemployment rates being fairly low in this area, or no worse usually than they usually are, we really haven't had the impact that we expected to have. The concern will be as we go through this transition of losing our support of the extra unemployment insurance that people are getting, that may really negatively affect us, or if we go through another major shutdown, that would actually have an impact. So there are other landlords in the audience that can possibly speak to this. However, from a personal standpoint, I do not have any collection problems. And when we kind of took the pulse of the meeting the other night of the landlords that were on our call, it did not appear that they had anything outside of the usual either. So we have been very fortunate in this area, I think, as opposed to some areas where they have had a lot more issues in housing than we have had.
Thanks. Kirk, what are you seeing over at BICAP?
Okay, well, I am so glad to hear what you just said, Kathy, because I'm working a lot on the other side with the people that are struggling. And there are a lot of people out there struggling to meet their rent payments, keep their utilities on and such. And our big worry amongst my fellow housing counselors was that people would think, well, because of the moratorium, it's not as important to stay on top of my rent. And fortunately, it doesn't seem to be panning out that way. I'm glad people are realizing that they're just getting a reprieve, not a freebie here when it comes to, keeping up with their financial obligations. But what I am seeing is how many different ways that you wouldn't think of that this pandemic can financially impact a household. Well, I still have my job, but I don't have any childcare anymore. Or I thought I had reliable childcare, and every 2 weeks it seems they have to go into quarantine. And it's so hard with that and many other things that trip up a typical household. It's been hard for a lot of people to stay on top of their bills. But people are reaching out. We're getting a lot of applications. And when you talk about the local area, we have gotten, when it comes to just the COVID-19 housing assistance program, Beltrami County has received more applications than any county outside of the greater 8-county metro area, at least according to the last data that I saw, which only makes sense because we're in a kind of a rather impoverished enclave, a part of the state. So it doesn't surprise me at all that people have been struggling. But there's been a significant increase in the amount of applications. It's kept us very busy. We're kind of hanging on by our fingertips until the end of December, which is when the funding is supposed to cease for CHAPS, COVID Housing Assistance Program. But in the meanwhile, we're trying to process as many applications as quickly and as accurately as we can. Through the end of October, the most current data that I have is we've helped people with rent and utilities to the tune of a little over $30,000. And I know that has significantly increased since the beginning of this month. And we still have many, many applications in the pipeline. But with that particular program, people have to show that this is related to the pandemic. And we have a bunch of other applications for other funding streams that have nothing to do with the pandemic, because there's always been a struggle for some households to maintain permanent housing out there. I'd like to thank a lot of the landlords out there, because I have seen everything from just simple patience to downright altruism on the part of some landlords, for them being as accommodating as they have been with low-income households that are struggling out there. So I could ramble, so don't let me keep going here. I think I may have said enough for now.
All right, thank you so much, Kurt. Yeah, Mike, if you'll give us kind of your update, as well as kind of update us on the state of the moratorium, I think that would be really helpful.
Right. So you want me to just kind of do the prepared stuff that you wanted me to go over now?
Yeah, if you would,
Sure.
please. Thanks.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, look, we all know, and we've already talked about this already, the banner headline in landlord-tenant legal world in Minnesota is the eviction moratoria. There are two that really matter right now. One is a state version and the other is a federal version. So the state version is the one that really matters. It's first in line, and how I have thought about the eviction moratoriums since they've started in March of this year, from a legal perspective, is how many hurdles does a landlord have to get over before they can file an eviction? That's really the right way to sort of legally analyze this right now, because this is new stuff, it's complicated, and it helps me sort of visualize it. So hurdle number one is the state eviction moratorium. This is based on an executive order from the governor, which is tied in time to the peacetime emergency declarations that we all hear about on a monthly basis. Those are 30 days at a time. That's all the governor can do. He can't do a 1-year peacetime emergency declaration, only 30 days at a time. And after each 30 days, the legislature has a chance to say yay or nay to that continuing on. And so far, the Senate, controlled by Republicans, has most months voted to end the peacetime emergency. The House, Democrat-controlled, has voted not to end the peacetime emergency. So the peacetime emergency goes on. The eviction moratorium refers to the peacetime emergency and is, like I said, tied in time to that. And it stops landlords from filing evictions for most reasons. It's actually been tweaked a couple of times since it came out in March, but the latest version says that a landlord can't file an eviction for non-payment of rent still. And that's the big, well over 90% of evictions in Minnesota are for non-payment of rent. Our eviction system is more or less a court-sanctioned collection effort. It's just how, it wasn't designed that way pre-Civil War, frankly, but that's really what it's evolved into now. It's a court-sanctioned collection effort in most cases. But now a landlord cannot file an eviction for non-payment of rent, which is why we haven't seen the evictions. Also, as we've heard from a couple of landlords right now, not every tenant is holding back in the rent. If they have the money, most of them are paying it. There's all kinds of surveys out, some that are federal, or some that are nationwide, but some that are state specific. But somewhere between 80 and 95% of renters in Minnesota, probably is the best guess, are current right now on their rent. So I'm not sure that we would have predicted that back in April or May when we just weren't sure. The federal money was promised, but nobody really knew when it was going to show up until it showed up in somebody's account. And the unemployment money did stabilize things. There's no question about it. But I think a lot of us had sort of more of a what's going to happen concern at that point than we might today, although we're all worried about the next wave, right? Anyhow, the state moratorium, hurdle number one, lasts officially until December 14th. But that 30-day period has been renewed, and it's likely that it'll get renewed again, I believe. We have no real special insight from the governor's office to believe that, but we haven't seen anything to show that they're going to disengage from the peacetime emergency at this point. Maybe not until the legislature's back in session. I'm not sure. The second hurdle, though, the one that really matters right now, is the federal hurdle. So even if the state moratorium on evictions went away, there's a federal hurdle routed originally from the president, an executive order from the president, through the CDC. The Center for Disease Control, believe it or not, has an eviction moratorium. There's a fair question to ask why the CDC is able to ban evictions throughout the country. And it's not every eviction, by the way. It's, again, non-payment of rent evictions is really what it's saying a landlord can't file an eviction for. But the CDC has some broad powers. Most people that are looking at the law that the CDC relies on to shut down evictions right now say that law was really designed to stop or allow the CDC to stop people from transporting crops or animals across state lines. And they extrapolated this out to say we're going to ban evictions. But regardless, that is on the books and it's in effect through December 31 of this year. And that was done a couple of months ago now. So that was a long range ban on evictions. There was another one before called the CARES Act, which didn't affect every landlord throughout the country, but those that had a federal subsidy. That sunsetted in late July. So it's got minimal impact right now, although it does still probably require a 30-day notice from a landlord. So whenever the court doors open again, a landlord might still have to give a 30-day notice under the CARES Act rule if they had a federal subsidy before, or even if they had a mortgage that was federally backed. But if I'm a landlord trying to understand a basic question, when can I file an eviction? How I would think about this is in sequence of hurdles. Number one, the state moratorium, because the CDC federal order explicitly defers to a state moratorium if it's got more protection, and our state protection clearly is stronger than the CDC one. So anyhow, hurdle number one, the state moratorium. Hurdle number two, the CDC order, that's the federal order. And hurdle number three is maybe a 30-day notice requirement under the CARES Act, which we haven't had any lapses in time in Minnesota where landlords could go file evictions. There have been evictions filed throughout the country in other states. There was a giant rush of evictions after the CARES Act ended. The protection ended in July 25th. And there was a gap between that and the CDC order coming in. However, most other states seem to require that landlords would swear under oath that they weren't covered by the CARES Act. So look, I'm a lawyer, and like all lawyers, we rely on precedents. We rely on what happened in the past to tell us what's going to happen in the future. A lot of this stuff is really uncertain footing, like so much of our lives is right now. We're not exactly sure how courts are going to deal with this when the eviction court doors open up again. We know at some point the eviction court doors will open. We don't know when, And I don't know how to really guess what that is. I can't say that I've really done localized examinations of the number of evictions in the counties we're talking about today. Statewide, there's about 13 to 15,000 residential evictions every year in Minnesota. They're not all in Minneapolis and St. Paul either. And right now we have about 12,000, I think, sort of average year bottled up evictions around the state. And they're going to happen at some point. And as a lawyer and somebody who works in this world, one of my big concerns is a giant rush of court cases and how the judges are going to be able to handle those. Because these aren't the only cases that they've been waiting on. All kinds of court cases have been slowed down. And so that's one of the concerns we have, is how quickly courts might try to process through evictions, which already were pretty fast court cases.
Thank you very much, Mike. Corey, have any questions come through? Does anyone want to raise their hand and ask a question?
I have not seen any questions come through yet, and there's no one with their hands raised. So, yeah, I think I added something in the chat about questions regarding the COVID-19 pandemic when we were doing the first kind of go around. But I think, Amber, I think you're okay with any kind of question that anyone could get help with from our panelists here regarding, you know, help that a landlord could use.
Yeah, it looks like Connie has a question.
Okay. I gotta find Connie.
For me, she's right at the top. I don't know if that's
Okay.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, so I'd actually talked to Bob today, but this is something that's come up with several times during the COVID thing, where I was working with a patient who was in an abusive situation, and they, for example, the one I talked about today, she's actually in the hospital, and she filed an OFP against her partner who is living in her rental, and they were there together. And with COVID, I was kind of like, okay, what happens when you have the layer of COVID on there? And I mean, he did a great job explaining it to me, but I know that that's come up several other times for us. And I'm just wondering if there's a place where we can, I mean, I was lucky enough to get a hold of Bob, but if there's a place that, like some of our social workers at the hospital or things like that, could figure out who to go to, if there's something written somewhere that when it's in a case of domestic abuse, what we do to protect those people who are the most vulnerable.
I think we could open it up to any panelist that would like to respond.
Well, I'll be first. I mean, especially with respect to the domestic violence issue, when the court or a landlord or a tenant or whoever, when we're looking or involved in a domestic violence situation, and the court issues an order saying that there can't be contact, or issues an order who's going to temporarily stay in the home, it's got nothing to do with COVID. COVID does not apply. There are no protections under the executive order for that. One of the exceptions under the executive order is if somebody is in danger, or, you know, if there's the possibility of harm to someone. So it would even if it was an eviction situation, and an order for protection is not an eviction situation, but even if it was, I think that the protections under the executive order would allow for that eviction to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Robert.
Okay.
Connie, did that answer
Thank you.
your question? Because we have a
I
second
kinda got it.
question. Yeah, we have a second question that kind of does go around, what are those exceptions? What are reasons for which someone can evict someone right now?
And I'll jump in and take this one. Sure, there are exceptions. As I mentioned, the governor has actually changed the eviction order a couple of times. The latest version, here are the key exceptions. So what I'm saying here are, this is the situations where a landlord can file an eviction in Minnesota right now. Number one, Bob just mentioned it, somebody is seriously endangered others on the premises. There have been different versions of that. It used to say just other tenants, but now it's others. So it could be a neighbor, it could be a delivery person, it could be the landlord themselves or their employee, seriously endangering others on the property. That's one exception where a landlord can file an eviction. Number two, significant damage to the property. Okay, so we're not exactly sure what significant means. I think that's an intentionally vague word. It's going to be up to the judge to try to figure that out, but significantly damages the property. Number three is a specific statute that's been around long before COVID happened, which says that a tenant can't have drugs, illegal weapons, prostitution, stolen property, or perpetrate domestic violence in their own home. That law predates COVID-19 by a long time, but it didn't, the COVID-19 eviction moratorium did not stop a landlord from filing an eviction for that. And the last one that really is worth talking about is the family exception. So if the landlord, well, first of all, you have to have a tenant that's got a lease that the landlord could end. So if they're in a month-to-month lease right now, and the landlord wants to retake possession and move in themselves, or a family member, which isn't defined, family member isn't defined in the statute, or in the executive order, I should say. So the landlord or a family member wants to move in, then the landlord can give the tenant a notice of at least 7 days, maybe more, depending on what the lease requires, and then make the tenant go. The landlord or their family member has to move in within 7 days of the tenant leaving. We've seen this exception used by some landlords already. It doesn't always seem to work. The judges seem to be asking some questions about it. It's not like you can just make this up. But if it's a real situation, I mean, we've seen them, right? Where we've got a husband and wife that are the landlords and they're splitting up. And so one of them wants to move back into the house that they've been renting. A pretty legitimate explanation for it. A judge is probably likely to go with that, but those are the exceptions. What you can't do is file an eviction because somebody's got a dog and they're not supposed to. Or their boyfriend has moved in and they're not on the lease, which probably after non-payment of rent, I think for sure, unauthorized occupants would probably be the second most common reason landlords file evictions. I think pets might be number 3 for landlords filing evictions too. You can't file an eviction for those reasons. So it's got to be seriously endangering the others, significant property damage, family member exception, or drugs probably in the property.
And let me just throw out there too, real quick, that one, if a landlord is looking and wants to know what the exceptions are, it's Executive Order 2079. It's real easy to find. It's very clearly stated in the order what it is. But what I'd also point out too is it's not just preventing eviction or prohibiting evictions. It's also prohibiting failure to renew. It prohibits, the termination of a lease agreement during the peacetime emergency period. It prohibits that.
That's a great point, Bob. I've been talking about evictions solely, which are the court cases that landlords file. But the last tweak that the governor created specifically answered that question, which we've been asking the governor's office since this all started, and I'm sure others have too. What about a notice to vacate? What about a notice of non-renewal? Yeah, a landlord can't do that right now either. And I'm going to try to post the link to all the executive orders here, and they're easy to find if you just look at them there. They're in the chat box now.
Thanks, Mike. I think you kind of answered the question I have in the question Q&A, but I'll read it again just in case you didn't quite get it. Can a landlord decide to not renew a lease for if their significant other has an OFP? I think you answered no to that. Like you can't choose not to renew a lease right now. I see Robert's nodding, so.
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it is. And, to be honest with you, if a landlord is doing that, I mean, there are protections under the landlord-tenant law already in domestic violence situations, and when a landlord can and can't terminate based on domestic violence.
Corey, are you seeing any questions, or is anyone raising their hand right now? If not, I will ask another question.
I'm not seeing, unless Connie still has her hand raised. Did Connie have another question?
No,
Oh.
Connie put her hand down, but Brianna left her hand. Oh, Brianna's hand was up.
Brianna, did you have a question?
You should put it in the
Brianna put her, Amber, why don't you ask your question? And if Brianna puts her hand back up, we'll let her go next.
All right. It's kind of for Kirk with the chaps. Is there a way in which landlords can help their tenants work through the COVID housing assistance program? Kind of expedite that at all?
I'll take that one.
Yeah.
I have processed applications where the landlord was helping the tenant, but they were never helping the tenant in any way that was unique to their status as being a landlord. The online application process is set up so that it pretty much empowers the applicant to do almost everything on their own. Uploading verification documents can be as simple as snapping a picture of it on your smartphone and then just uploading it as any kind of file. Beyond that, proof of income, proof of the debt itself. I suppose the one way that a landlord can help is if there are any documents that the tenant asks the landlord to fill out or to verify or whatever, that they be as accommodating as possible and as quick as possible. Because we are under kind of a tight time frame with a multitude of applications. So any less hindrance or barriers, the better. But maybe just encouragement on the landlord's part for the tenant to follow through with what's required online. Aside from that, I really can't think of anything that the landlords can do of substance that can help. One thing is for the landlords to know this resource is available, because some tenants may not be fully aware that they can just easily bring up online a simple pre-screening app and then an application process if you go through this pre-screening. Beyond that, it may just be required to be available for one phone call or exchange a couple of emails or something to that effect to fully apply online. I wish there was something that the landlord could do that was of real significance, but there really isn't. And I think that was the whole purpose of the program, the online process, was to totally empower the applicant to be able to quickly and easily get an application in with all the backup verifications to show that they are in trouble specifically because of the pandemic. So
Kurt, that one of the things that we find as landlords is we like to make sure that as an association, we keep our landlords as up to date as possible on all the resources that are available to assist tenants, because frankly, what we end up being is the problem solver. If are not in a position where they have the knowledge to access these programs themselves, or are, as you say, are even aware of them. And so it becomes our responsibility to help those tenants solve their problems. And so for us to know who to call, what the process is, and we end up explaining it. You may think that sometimes they're dealing with this themselves, but many times we're the one assisting them, filling out these forms, doing all the work, answering their questions, encouraging them to continue on, and helping work them through the process. So one of the things that I thought was important for people to realize in this particular meeting we're having now is that as opposed to calling 211 and getting the state number, where do our landlords and our tenants access this information locally? Who do we call? Who do we tap into for questions? Because unless we really understand the assistance that's available to the tenant, unfortunately, some of them will not access it as efficiently as they should be, or may not access it at all.
Well, Kathy, I've worked a lot with Andrew.
Yes.
And I would invite people like you and Andrew to just call me directly if you want, have a conversation about what resources are available. But in general, when it comes to the CHAPS application process, is just housinghelpmn.org. And it's.
You You are a local resource for that application process?
It's entirely online.
Okay.
And,
All right.
and we are one of the administrators. There's also several others, the Village of Hope, the Community Development Center, and others that are processing these applications, but it all starts with the applicant going online. It is important to note, though, I believe, especially with landlords, please realize there are limitations here. Example, you know your tenant is already getting a subsidy.
Right.
That makes them ineligible. They are already receiving housing assistance, which makes them ineligible to apply for the COVID housing assistance program. Okay, also people, it's a very generous income gap or cap, but they are, we are able to look at households with income 300% of the poverty level. Normally it's 200% or even lower than that before a person's income would allow them to be eligible to apply. But important note, they must be low income. They must not already be receiving ongoing housing assistance. So if they are already receiving a subsidy and they're falling behind on their own part, then that particular program cannot help them. There are other one-time assistance programs that I could talk in detail about for specific households. A lot of our assistance through the CHAPS program has been for utilities, where, well, we're the main administrators of energy assistance in this local area. When we just started to get funding for energy assistance, so people who are being threatened with electric or gas shut off, you know, have another avenue of support there too. But I'm not averse to you giving me a call out of the blue when I explain a situation, and I'll steer you in what I think are the best directions to look in. So,
Well, I'm fortunate that Bi-County CAP has presented at our meetings and gone through in the past different programs. And it really is a help to landlords and therefore a help to their tenants to help them solve these problems. And so we do dissipate information to our membership. And so some of these summaries of different programs and stuff, if if they are given to us, or anything that may be of interest to landlords that to create better relations with their tenants, we do communicate with our membership on a regular basis.
good, good.
And I would be careful. Don't assume that tenants are familiar with all these programs. You just should not. You're going to run into tenants in the next 6, 8, 10 months that have no idea that there might be some money that they can access. They're going to think it's a gimmick, a trick, a scheme, that have never gotten any kind of financial assistance in their minds, at least, in their entire lives, and they're not going to think that they're eligible for it. And so you shouldn't assume as a landlord that the tenant must have already applied and been turned down. They might not know anything about it. The other thing that I'd talk about, because it sounds like in the Bemidji area that most landlords are getting paid, and that's great. But I think there's going to be a time where that percentage of your paying clients isn't as high. And what we have seen a lot of is tenants don't have all the money. They have some of it, but they don't have all of it. And then landlords, it depends how long this goes on for, how long these moratoriums really last for. But let's say it goes till next summer. I think that would have been inconceivable if we would have said that in March or April. But now I don't know when this will all stop. I don't know anybody that does know when this will all stop. And as tenants' debt, just sort of mountains up, it just grows and grows. If they fall behind, they're going to think, well, what's the point of me paying, $2,000 when I owe $4,000? Where you might really want that $2,000, might be willing to work out some sort of longer term payment plan with the tenant, but they don't know that. And so the communication level, I realize it has to go both ways, and a lot of tenants simply want to hide when they're behind. But if there's indications from a landlord that, hey, if you can't make full payment, let us know what you can make and we'll discuss what options you have going forward, probably better for everybody long term. So again, don't assume tenants know about all the programs that are out there. I realize that gives you another task as a landlord, but let's be honest, it benefits you too, right? If they qualify for the money, do you really care that it came from Uncle Sam or the state or the county or the city? As long as you're getting the rent payment, probably you're pretty happy to get the rent payment. So you have an interest in making sure that tenants know about these programs. Don't assume that they know about them. And if somebody's really fallen behind, open up the lines of communication and see, hey, do you have some of it? Or are you just completely flat broke? Maybe that's the case. But if it isn't, I know a lot of tenants are holding back. I talk to them where they say, I've got half the money. I don't see why it would make any sense for me to talk to the landlord at all. And maybe it doesn't, but sometimes it will make a huge difference.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah,
Well,
I want to make sure I let Kyle give a chance to ask a question here. So Kyle, you should be added in.
Yep. And can you hear me all right now?
Yep.
Okay. Just maybe a little conversation on if there's property damage at all during this time. For instance, I have a tenant that had a cat that had kittens, and the tenant is now gone for quite a while. They had a pet addendum agreement, and the house is obviously taking on damage. And obviously we can't evict, or it looks like, and from what I'm hearing, non-renewal of lease is not an option either. Some of those pieces are there places that I can go to be able to help for any type of housing damage during this moratorium time?
I'm sorry, so you're asking for some sort of financial assistance for dealing with the property damage?
Yep. So I don't know if it would be a financial assistance. I don't know if I'm trying to rectify actually the pet problem with the tenant. However, I don't know that the tenant is capable of paying the rent, much less be able to help pay for, maybe whether it's washing of carpets or whatever it happens to be. And in the agreement, it clearly states that the tenant would do those things.
But the tenant
but
is
I don't
still
know.
there? They still have possession or not?
Yeah, currently they have a housing assistance program that paid rent for the month of November. And obviously eviction isn't an option. So I'm a little worried about trying to work through the cat situation, but looking at, property damage during a portion of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about one of the exceptions to the eviction rule being significant property damage. And the real question would be, is that significant, what you've just described? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, is it enough that somebody gets a window broken because their kid threw a baseball through the window? Is that enough? Is it a dollar number? It's not really specifically stated in the executive order what significant property damage means. And so we're all just kind of guessing, and there aren't enough cases to really have useful precedents for us to say, oh, cat damage over $800, check. That's good enough to be significant property damage. We just can't be sure about whether that's sufficient to file an eviction. So that might not be a winning route for you as a landlord.
Right.
As far as can you file?
I would consider, if you're in the Bemidji area or an area that has like a St. Vincent de Paul, I would strongly consider trying to connect that tenant with some additional support if they don't already have a case manager. You mentioned that they were part of a housing program. Maybe there's a case manager that they'll let you reach out to, but have a conversation that, this is, an eviction will stay on the record for a long time and make it incredibly difficult for them to rent again when and if that happens down the line. It's, you're looking at serious trouble. But I've seen people get, good counseling from some of these charitable groups that aren't necessarily attached to a nonprofit agency.
I would say if you're trying to get the money, whether it's from the tenant themselves or through a social service agency of some type, it helps a lot to name a number. That might be really hard to do, but if you just say, I want the tenant to cover the damage, that doesn't really mean much specific, right? I mean, if you say, I want, $600, I know it's going to cover most of the cost or whatever it might be, then it's a lot easier for somebody to say okay to that. If you're willing to put that sort of thing in writing so everybody sort of knows what they're getting for that. So a firm number like that can help.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. I don't have any other questions lined up right now, but I guess I maybe have one I could ask, Amber, if you, um, I would just think, I think it would be helpful for everyone if briefly maybe, you know, each of the panelists gave just maybe a brief idea of where from their role they see how we could work together to be best prepared for maybe when the eviction moratorium does come off. So maybe from like Kathy's standpoint, how we could, you know, best be prepared to, for as a landlord to work together with say legal services and housing providers, and from Kirk's standpoint is, you know, from a housing provider, how, you know, what could we be doing for all the people on the call that's going to put us in the best situation to be prepared when the eviction moratorium does end. I don't know if anybody can jump in and go first out of the panelists, if that's an okay question. Kind of putting you on the spot. It's a tough one, but I just thought it'd be a good topic if you guys have anything to add to that.
Well, I think I can go first, because I think that that as a landlord organization, as a landlord myself, that we feel information is the most valuable resource we have to make sure that our life and our tenants' lives are going smoothly. And obviously, as a landlord, we do not want issues. We want tenants that pay their rent, that take good care of the properties. Tenants usually want to achieve those same goals. But many times, as I said before, they are not in a position to know what these programs and resources are available to them. They are not good problem solvers. They would prefer to ignore you if they feel that they're not living up to their obligations, because they do personally feel bad about it. And so I think we look at it as that it takes the entire community and all of our resources to resolve these problems and keep people in stable housing. And our goal is to provide quality, stable housing to our residents. And many times they will end up in little issues. We're sometimes the first people to know about that. But for instance, a good example would be on the utility assistance that we can provide by just giving them the application when we get a new tenant. Many times we'll hand out those applications to apply for fuel subsidies. Having those type of just programs at our fingertips and knowing something about them is really a very valuable tool to stabilizing the housing in our community. So, you know, it's not just a rent it and forget it type of thing. Unfortunately, that's not the way this business works. You are a social worker, you're a financial advisor, you're a personal counselor. So it does take everybody, and really being fully aware of the resources within our community, which is why we ask that your organizations reach out to us too and keep us involved and knowledgeable about what's going on. So we really welcome the possibility of these quarterly panel discussions, or however we're going to format it, these meetings, because knowledge is what's going to help get us through this. And we understand that it's not getting any better right now. When it's going to end, Mike, is anyone's question. But we know for the next few months, it's not going to be easy. And that means our tenants are going to be even more challenged than they are now. And we have to be prepared for that. But that in turn presents challenges for us financially. Many of our landlords have mortgages. We have to pay our city bills. We have to pay our insurance and our real estate taxes. And so consequently, this becomes a circle that all of us have to participate in to make it work for everyone.
Thank you, Kathy. Just 1 second before we let the rest of the panelists kind of think about how we can still get prepared for when the eviction moratorium ends. But I'm going to launch a quick poll. You'll see something come up at the bottom of your screen, I believe, or on your screen, just wanting to hear if this was helpful or not. We're getting close to the end of the meeting, so just launching that poll. And Kirk or Bob or Mike, if you guys want to keep going, that'd be great.
I can't see anything because of your poll.
My fault.
No, that's okay. I'm gonna cancel out of it just so.
Yep.
I would like to point out the fact that the people who have the most trouble maintaining permanent stable housing were already having trouble before the pandemic. it's very stressful for some people, especially when they already have physical or mental health challenges. And a lot of times those could be rather well hidden and you're not fully aware that they are very challenged. Now, add the pandemic on top of all of that. I'm sorry, I'm a relatively healthy old guy and I'm quite stressed out most of the time trying to rediscover what the new normal is. Now imagine if I'm a person who's having a hard time ambulating and I'm on multiple medications and such, and I'm not able to go to my doctor as frequently as I was able to. Now add all the financial stress on top of that, it could be very emotionally taxing for people. So I guess I'm teaching patience when the moratorium ends and it hits the proverbial fan, hopefully not very heavily. But when that time does come, just realize that I try and encourage my clients that I have an ongoing relationship with, that landlords are human beings. You know, they have bills to pay too. They have trials and tribulations the same as you. Playing cat and mouse is the last thing you should be doing with your landlord. And just giving them as much coaching and advice as possible, as much information like Kathy was referring to. Too much information is never a bad thing, at least in my world. But between giving as much information as possible, resources, different directions you could look for assistance, helps relieve a lot of that stress. Yes, I can understand people being afraid to reach out for help sometimes. That's why they're hiding from their landlord, because they don't want to come to grips with what's really going on here in their lives. But if you are patient and you maintain open lines of communication, this is me talking with a client, that's your best chance at a positive outcome here. Because you're not going to find a positive outcome for yourself if it's negative for your landlord also. You have to find some way to where this can be a win-win. When people are afraid to reach out for help, I think that might have been part of the initial idea with the COVID housing assistance program, being able to access through 211 United Way, is that it's kind of hard to think of it as a scam if it's a United Way and, you know, greeting, and they're the ones directing me in this direction. We've always been doing what we refer to now as triages through BICAP, where anybody who's having trouble with housing can call between 9 and 3:30, Monday through Friday. They'll be connected with a counselor like myself, and we will dedicate time helping them get their brain wrapped around what are the possible resources out there that could help them. You know, what does accessing this entail as compared to going in this direction? What should I be doing with my neighbor? What should I tell my landlord? Well, tell them the truth. You know, I mean, sometimes people don't think that's an option until they listen to somebody who they respect. Tell them, go, you know, just tell them the way it is, plain and simple. Anyway, does this make sense?
It does, Kirk, and I want to just make sure we give Mike or Bob a chance to add anything here before we get to the end of our time. We're getting real close to that 4 o'clock mark.
Okay.
I mean, I think that what's been said so far is really the crux of how we're going to get through this together. It's education, it's information, it's discussion, it's open communication. Again, similar to Mike, I'm a tenant's attorney. I'm not a landlord attorney. Maybe in the future we bring a landlord's attorney in to help us with one of these discussions. But communication between the tenant and the landlord is paramount. That's the most important thing it is. And then open discussion, and hopefully you don't need, or my clients don't need to contact me, or hopefully a quick discussion with a landlord attorney could answer questions for the landlords themselves, and it may not be a legal issue. It might be something a lot simpler. So I really do think that opening the lines of communication, that's, to me, that you couldn't make more sense or help more people but by opening the lines of communication.
Absolutely, thanks.
And I'll add that on the day that the moratoriums go away, there's going to be a lot of landlords around the state that literally rush down to the courthouse, stand, because we've seen this in other states. We've seen it where the lines are hundreds deep, where landlords are waiting to file evictions. Evictions in Minnesota are costlier than anywhere else in the country. They're $300 just to file an eviction. As a landlord, if I had a tenant that I could file an eviction against for non-payment of rent, I might be tempted to run down if they owe me 2, 3, 4, 8 months rent and file an eviction. But kind of this communication theme that we've been talking about, you could go to the tenant and say, hey, look, I know that the eviction moratoriums have been there, but they're not here now. Those are gone now. I can file an eviction tomorrow, or you can leave by Sunday. It's an option that a landlord can look at. If we're talking about the day the moratoriums go away, it might save them some money, might save the tenant not getting an eviction on their record, which Amber, you mentioned as being something most tenants really want to avoid. So yeah, the communication still is sort of our overriding theme here with tenants, because they might not know about these programs. And once you have the right to file an eviction, I think it makes sense from a business standpoint for a landlord to evaluate whether filing the eviction is the right move that day.
I think that's well said, Mike. I really do think that that was well said.
Well,
I think,
a fly on the wall at some of our meetings where we talk about techniques for eviction avoidance, because we've talked about so many of those ideas of, you know, that where you're, and part of it is just like you say, that lines of communication, counseling your tenant through this, letting them know what the ramifications are, and coming up with the best solution that is equitable for both parties is the goal.
I think that all sounds great. I want to kick it back to Amber, because I apologize. I asked a big question with not enough time left, and I'm sorry that we're over a couple minutes over. So I want to give it to Amber to close us out.
I think that was a fantastic closing. I think all of your guys' words were so valuable. I think people will leave this being better landlords, better tenants, better case managers. So I'm so appreciative. I know myself as a program officer, I am going to go back to the table and work on more resource descriptions for landlords to get those out, so that it's not so hard for landlords to track down what resources are available to their tenants. And yeah, just thanks again, and I'll keep you all in the loop for the next meeting. I know you guys are all really busy, but I really appreciate this line of communication being open and your help making this happen.
Thank you, Amber.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Are you saying it's okay?